Well, let's see what's happening overseas. And joining me live now is Peter Mathews, Professor of Political Science at Cyprus College. Thank you very much for joining us today here on Weekend Edition. Let's talk about the mass protests up to the 19th straight day of the protests. Of course, we've seen the tearing down of statues, a major concern of a spike in COVID-19 cases. What has been the response that you can tell us?
Well, it's been, the response is very, very strong in that there are so many people out there protesting racism and, of course, the killing, the murder of George Floyd and many other murders before that by police that were out of control of African Americans. And the really big news was when President Trump announced he's going to have a rally on Juneteenth, which is June 19th, the day that many African Americans celebrate as the day at Independence Day, because it's the time that they found out that they were actually freed as slaves back in the 1860s. And this was really a tremendously important day. And in Tulsa, Oklahoma, of all places, when in Tulsa there was also a horrible massacre that occurred in 1921 of African American, it was called the African American Wall Street or Black Wall Street because many wealthy African Americans lived there. And it was a very successful economic community. And there was a horrible white mob that went in there and massacred them. So those dual negatives that Trump had chosen somehow or had landed with it on Juneteenth as well as in Tulsa was a horrible backlash to that. Many people opposed it, and Mr. Trump finally said, I'm going to postpone it by one day and hold on the 20th. That was really the big news about all these protests and the culmination of the turmoil going on in the country right now.
Yes, we heard that announcement less than 24 hours ago. Professor, talking about the COVID-19 spikes, we spoke this time last week, some of your colleagues, about the spike from Memorial Weekend. But we're also hearing of the fear of a second wave in the US. However, many would say that the US is still in the first wave.
Yes, I think most people say we're in the first wave still. If a second wave comes, it'll be a few weeks to a few months from now. And the results of not just their opening up precipitously, which I think many states opened up too soon. In fact, 20 something states right now have an increase in COVID infections, and many have an increase in COVID deaths. So we're starting to see that kind of a surge coming up. And I don't think it'll be immediate because you have to look at the results of the infections rates that went on during the last few weeks. And I think the main thing is the precipitous opening and people not taking it very seriously in some states about wearing those masks and social distancing, which could really keep the number of deaths down, the number of infections down. A recent study said that if we'd caught this thing earlier and started wearing masks 2 weeks earlier than we did and started social distancing, we could have eliminated 66,000 to 80,000 deaths that have already occurred. So I think that's the main crisis right now.
Yeah, unbelievable statistics. And also a report this week from the World Bank is warning that COVID-19, the pandemic has plunged the global economy into a deep recession of historic proportions. And the recovery is certainly grim, especially for developing countries. Professor Mathews, in your opinion, are there indications of the US going into a depression?
Well, we certainly are in a recession now, and that's defined as consecutive quarters of negative growth, and we're having that now. Will that turn into a depression? I think it depends how things are handled. We should have pumped a lot of money directly into the economy to the workers, kept them and given them their salaries, even if they were not working because of COVID, and put the money into small business directly so they could continue to be ready to operate once the infection was over. The U.S. didn't do that. It botched it. It waited for 2 weeks before it responded to real testing, massive testing. We still haven't done massive testing. Waited too long, and the money was pumped into this SBA, which is a very overloaded small business administration bureaucracy, which couldn't handle it. And many small businesses, medium businesses, did not get the money they were supposed to get to keep them afloat, to keep them vibrant, at least till they start working again and start employing people again. It should have been done that way as it was done in countries like Denmark way down and actually has leveled it off to where now they don't even have any new infections. These are the countries that we should be following. South Korea. And yes, the country could go into a Great Depression if this continues because Great Recessions can turn into the Great Depression unless they're attacked immediately with investment, with stimulus money. And that has to be done even including public employment. So let's see if the politicians will respond to that and do what they have to do.
And my final question to you, Professor, the 2020 election, what are your thoughts on the recent polls? I mean, depending on which one you look at and what you read, I saw one this morning which indicates Joe Biden is winning female voters, another suggesting Trump will beat Biden. What are your thoughts?
Well, in the national polls, it is true that Joe Biden is about 10 to 14 points ahead of Trump. That's a national poll. But American elections are not national elections. It's not based on the popular vote nationwide. It's based on the state by state vote, electoral college vote. And in that case, President Trump in those border swing states, while his numbers have gone down since the coronavirus crisis, how he handled it and how he handled this attacks on African Americans, mishandled it. I think because of that, his numbers went down. And so it's very close in many of those border states. Although Joe Biden has actually forged ahead slightly in some of those border states, which Trump won last time. So right now in Michigan and in Wisconsin, Joe Biden is ahead. Those are two major key border states that would be called swing states, where Trump actually won the electoral college vote. This time he's behind Joe Biden by just a few points. I mean, 2% or 3%. In some places he's tied. So it's very close still, with the trend going downward for Trump, even in the swing states. So if the election were held today, I think Joe Biden would win, but it's not at all sealed and signed and delivered yet until November.
Very interesting to watch. Peter Mathews, Professor of Political Science at Cypress College. As always, really appreciate your time and expertise. Stay well.
My pleasure. You too, Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to have your company.